Conversations with Karen and Kat. I'm Karen Scott Green.
And I'm Kat Hardrick.
And we're here today on location at the historic First Iconium Baptist Church at 542 Moreland Avenue. And we are here today with Reverend Shaun Smith and Kimberlyn Carter. And we were here today for a roundtable on gun violence. And we're going to have Reverend Smith and Ms. Carter tell us a little bit more about what transpired today and the reason for why you were putting this on.
You want to start, Kim?
I'll yield to you, Shaun.
Oh, she
Shaun
the first
Carter,
time ever, Kim would yield.
The first time she passed the mic
The
up,
first time she passed the mic. No, so I mean, Black Push decided we reached out to a few people we've been partnered with. First Iconium was one of them. NAACP was one. Concerned Black Clergy. Changing the Face of Justice. Hope Hustlers and Moms Demand Action. So many different organizations because I've been traveling throughout the whole country over the last couple of months, like dealing with gun violence. And what really upsetted me one day is I came home, and I don't pay attention to local politics, local news a lot.
Terrifying.
It is terrifying. And I looked at the local news, and I was beginning to see like all these shootings that were happening in my own backyard. And it kind of took me back to the whole perspective, like how can you be so adamant about other things that are going on in other communities and not focusing on your own community? So we made a big push, and within like 14 days, literally, this turned around within 14 days, to bring elected officials around the table, bring law enforcement around the table, bring community people who have been impacted by gun violence, whether they were on the law enforcement side of it or whether they were law enforcement side, the opposite side, right? To bring them all together and be able to kind of first off start by having a conversation. Because one thing I understand is that nothing's going to be done. I love the fact that people have the argument that it's time for us to stop talking.
Right.
Reality is that we're not going to get any action without talking.
That's right.
And we wanted to have a conversation, so we were blessed to have a U.S. and Northern Georgia Attorney General here. Ryan Buchanan was here. We had a DA from Gwinnett County. We had representatives from Fulton County, DA's office, from the CAB solicitor's office to down here today. So it was a really great conversation. I think we left more motivated because they were ready to meet once a week.
Okay.
And I had to gear it back to being like once a month because there are other things that we're working on, but we got to start having the conversation. Now that we've had the conversation, now we have to start putting real actions in place to be able to combat gun violence, especially here in Metro Atlanta.
Exactly. And a little bit about you, Kim?
Well, I'm Kimberlyn Carter. I am the executive director of C3, which is the Rep Georgia Institute, C4, the Represent Georgia Action Network, as well as we launched a new PAC last week, the Peach Power PAC. Changing the Face of Justice is one of our initiatives where we're trying to impact the judicial pipeline, because what we realize in this space of criminal justice reform, and as we begin to reform this idea of community safety, that it comes from a lot of different tension points. And so we focused on district attorneys and trying to move Georgia and the Office of District Attorney to a more decarceral space, right? And then we looked at our Solicitor Generals and we started pushing them to doing more expungement days and record restriction things. And once again, looking at how we become less carceral in this state. And then we started to really hone in on the school to prison pipeline and really begin to challenge school boards about their position on justice in the school system. But the bench is still there. And we have young people and children who are every day going in courtrooms before the bench. And if I can be frank, the bench is very stale, male, and pale. And we know that we're in a very diverse and demographically changing state.
Yes.
And so the face of justice needs to reflect the communities that it's being served in.
Right.
And so that's why we started this initiative. But the gun violence issue, we just sang happy birthday to a young lady that turned 13 years old. When I was 13 years old, we only did tornado drills, and fire drills, right? This idea that our babies in preschool are actually doing live active shooter drills is something that is so foreign to the very core of who I am.
Isn't that something, just let that sink in though. I mean, really think about that. We're doing gun safety drills. And
For 3-year-olds.
What when you made me take that back, so I'm from Michigan, and I remember doing tornado drills, going down on the ground,
underneath the desk, yeah.
And the fire drill, just when Reverend out the quiz. Remember the teacher about to hand out the
Reverend
quiz.
Shaun and I are from South Florida, so we did hurricane drill.
Yeah, we did the hurricane.
And don't forget, the drills would come just when the teacher's about to give us the quiz. We'd be like, thank you, Lord, because I ain't studied last night.
Yeah, and now the shift.
Right?
That's scary.
So, I'm hearing what you're saying in that with the change in the face of justice, it needs to be a complete picture between the DAs, the folks who are prosecuting, the folks that are on the bench. And then we also need to get criminal defense attorneys involved in that as well.
Absolutely.
I ran for judge this year. It feels like a year ago.
I know.
In Gwinnett County. I didn't win. I got 44% of the vote. But one of the things
That is movement.
That's right. I ran against a 22-year incumbent.
And do you know that 94% of the judicial seats in this state run without a challenge every 4 years?
That's the reason why I ran.
That's right.
That's the reason why I ran. But one of the things that I talked about when I was on the campaign trail for 18 months was restorative justice and having justice that's not just about locking people up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That we have to have, there has to be grace. Where's the grace when you come before the judge? Because it can't all be about, and that's not to say that we're not going to hold people accountable. Because, as Black folks, we live in Black communities. We want people to be held accountable for crimes.
Absolutely.
I think the misconception is that if you're Black, you're somehow going to be lenient on crime. No, we want people to be held accountable, but
we're not lenient on crime. We're just abundant in grace.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and
can you say that again? We're not lenient on crime. We're just abundant in grace.
Abundant in grace.
And I would even say this, going a step further. There's been no community that has been attacked the way the African American community has been attacked, that has responded the way the African American community has responded. You look at South Carolina and Charleston, when we had the shooting that happened in the church, and it's sentimental to me because I don't pastor, but I minister, right?
Absolutely.
And the aspect of knowing that I can bring people into a church house and they not be safe anymore is dangerous. But the fact of the reality is that every single time a Black community has been impacted or hit by gun violence, what if we stood up and said that we forgive the person on the other side? Buffalo families said they forgive the person on the other side. South Carolina families went into the courtroom and said, we forgive the person on the other side.
They forgave them.
That's not other communities that have done that. Even the Asian population, and I love my brothers and sisters on the Asian side, they didn't come out publicly and say, we forgive the person who came into our spas and shot. And when she talks about this grace, it's something that within the Black culture, we talk about the Black church, but part of the reason why the Black church is so important in the Black culture is because of the fact that it has ingrained within us that we have to have a certain level of forgiveness. But there also has to be a certain space to where we can forgive, but still we can forgive but not forget. If that's important.
It is.
So when we talk about gun violence, and even when we talk about what happened today, it was a lot of African Americans in the room, but we had our white counterparts in the room. We had other people from different races in the room, right?
That's right.
What changing the face of justice, what Black Push is saying, what all the other partners were saying is that we can do this. We can end gun violence, right? On the back of my shirt, it says we can end gun violence, right? On the back of my shirt, it says we will end gun violence.
That's right, we will.
And we can and we will do it, but it has to be a community effort. But one of the things I remember one time I met with a DA, and she asked me the question, and I'm not going to say her name, but she said, "Who's the most powerful person in the courtroom?" And by nature, what do you think I said?
You think it was the judge.
I said it was the judge, right? And that DA, who was an African American DA, female, she said to me, no. She said, I'm the most powerful person in the courtroom.
And that's correct.
She said because what I charge a person with ties the hand of the judge, right? Yeah. And I can literally limit what they're able to do by the way I charge a person.
Absolutely.
And even when we talk about that, one of the things that we mentioned earlier today, what I was disappointed in is that we had the community out, but what we failed to have out today was more elected officials, more people who are representing the community.
So who all did you invite?
So from Black Push's side, we reached out to everybody. We focused on Fulton County, Clayton County, Gwinnett County, and DeKalb County for this first town roundtable. We invited every commissioner, every DA, every prosecutor, every law enforcement, every police department, the sheriff's office. We invited everybody.
We went down to mayors.
Went down to mayors and everybody.
Wow.
Some of the people, they responded back and said that they're not interested in having this conversation. And again, for those who are elected officials, my challenge to you would be, what are you afraid of? If you're afraid of the people who you are going to come to our churches in the next couple of months and say, we need your vote. If you're afraid of those people, then stop proclaiming that you're representing the people that are dying on the streets, and you don't want to give them a voice when you have opportunity to give them a voice.
Are you afraid that we may actually find solutions?
Right.
You know, like what really is, what could happen? Not from the negative side, but what could happen if we all came together and we started thinking of the solutions, how we cure all of this? Because it's someone said it was a pandemic. It really is a pandemic. It's a pandemic.
Well, actually, I'm glad that you brought that point, because what the global pandemic taught us is that with enough pressure applied, policy and government can respond.
Yeah,
right?
quickly.
We even saw solutions to homelessness with abandoned hotels in these large things. And so what we're dealing with is a mindset and a mouth set from our elected officials. It's a mindset and a mouth set.
She's dropping nuggets all through this little 5 minutes we just started.
And that's why I said, when y'all was like, that's why I said, can Kim come on with me? I've been on podcast with her. I know how she does this.
No, I mean, it's just because it's not my passion, it's my purpose. And so we talked about this global pandemic, right? And we were able to, everybody was on board talking about, but this gun violence is endemic.
Yeah.
It's not just a pandemic. It is endemic. It is in every part and parcel of our lives. And so because of that is why we have to change the mindset and the mouth set. I was so excited when the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy said that gun violence is a national health crisis. That it's a public health endemic, because it framed it in a way that said everything has to respond to solving or curing this.
Yes.
Right.
And so how we are looking are looking at this endemic and how we're looking at how we cure it is the beginning of this process with the conversations happening, right? That is part of the cure. And so what I heard a lot from the mothers and the people in the community, what were they asking us for? A cure.
Yes.
Not a program, not some cute dare dog and stuffed animal running around the school campus.
We don't need another program. We don't need another
They were asking us, how do you cure this pain that I go to sleep with every night, right? And so our job is to every day think of how we begin to cure the pain. And that begins with mindsets and mouth sets, how we speak about it, how we think about it, and how we speak about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So let me ask you, Black Push, where did that come from? How did it start?
Yes. So interesting enough, I really re-educated myself on how Black Push got started like a year ago. I was going back through WhatsApp, and I had a friend of mine in 2009 who said, hey, Shaun, we should start a nonprofit that gears around African Americans and teaching young people how to start their own business. And we should name it Black Push. And I was like, cool name, let's do it. Never did anything with it. And in 2016, I really just felt led to kind of shift back to my roots, right? And my roots, like I have been working in the restaurant industry for over 16 years at this point, but my roots were always advocating for those who don't have a voice in spaces I have a voice for. And I just went 2016 and still was afraid of doing it. And in 2019, right before the pandemic, I was like, you know what, God, if you lead me, I will follow. And that's exactly the way it panned out for me. And we just kind of brought Black Push into this space. And I would say this, like, for those who out here who may see this podcast, for those who think that sometimes your work goes unrecognized, right? keep working.
That's right.
And
We saw you.
Yeah.
And so Kat and I were at a function in Gwinnett County, and we saw you and you spoke, and we're like, we gotta get it. We gotta get it.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
keep
you're
working.
You're
Absolutely.
And it's not about when you're, one of the things I learned is that when your motive is pure, you don't need anybody to speak up for you.
That's
one of my mentors was a guy named Dr. Kimberlyn Carter. He pastored the church in Fort Lauderdale, which is my Olive Baptist Church.
Yep, that's a big church.
Dr. Kimberlyn Carter used to have a saying, and he would always say that if you're going to get into this field, if you're going to do this kind of work, one of the things that's important is that you have to be, one, unsacrificial, which means you have to be willing to put self to the side and be willing to actually promote the ideas of other people. Correct. But also, too, you have to be able to humble yourself enough to the fact that it's not about you, right? It's not about you. So Black Push has taken a narrative that like anything that we do is not about Black Push. Okay. We work with FaithWorks, but our logo's not on their flyer, right? It doesn't mean anything like that. And the one thing I love about Kim, the one thing I love about the NAACP of Georgia, the one thing I love about the partners that we've brought on board with it is that we're really mission driven. Yeah. We're not really all about like who's next. Like me and Kim can sit and talk about our donors and share donors lists with each other. Because of the fact that we want to see that both organizations continue to make it, because we understand, I understand that Black Push is nothing without changing the face of justice. In Rep Georgia, I have to throw in Rep Georgia because she also represents Rep Georgia. But it's not in most organizations, most nonprofits should be 501c3. We should be nonpartisan, right?
Absolutely.
Because it should not be a left or right issue. I mean, whether we see a young man who's being killed in the streets by a police officer or being killed in the streets by his peers, that's everybody issue.
That isn't everybody.
When we have people who are losing their businesses because of gun violence in their neighborhoods, and most of those neighborhoods are, once again, disproportionately black and brown. Where Black and brown people are losing their businesses due to gun violence. We mentioned earlier in our roundtable about Hope Hustlers is helping to try to save a Shell gas station. And we just see, okay, well, that Shell gas station needs to be shut down. The reality is that attached to that Shell gas station is a woman who has dedicated her life and her life savings to starting a restaurant that's attached to that Shell gas station. If we get rid of that Shell gas station, she loses her family business.
So her business is going to be affected when that Shell gas station closes too.
And once again, all for the cause of gun violence, right?
So how gun violence ripples and affects?
It affects more than just the psychosis of people. It affects people's economics. It affects people being able to go and safely move around from place to place. It affects people all the way around. So when we talk about gun violence, it's not just from the perspective of, yes, my baby's not home at night, right? It's yes, my business is no longer there. Right. Yeah. Yes, my mom doesn't feel comfortable going to her grocery store anymore. Or to her church. Right. And even, going to Uvalde, we had the Uvalde mayor on earlier. I know there's some connection issues. But even just hearing the stories of talking to those kids in Uvalde, where you have kids who now don't want to go to their park, who don't want to go to their school, and don't want to go to any school. They won't even step into classrooms anymore because they're that afraid at the age of 6, 7, and 8 of losing their life. Wow. Shame on America. That's right. And shame on us as a country. And shame on those of us who pretend to be people who stand up for people, but at the same time, when we have opportunities to really stand up for people, we say we don't want to be a part of the conversation.
Because statistically, the United States, we're the only one that has a gun issue. So obviously there is a solution if we're the only one on the planet with this issue. Right. So do you guys have some statistics, and then with those statistics, do you have some solutions?
Well, I think it's a reframing because when you go to other third world countries, it's a lot of guns. What it is that we have the most of all these countries. Not that other countries don't have deaths by gun violence. Right. It's just that by far we're up to 400 plus. Right, where all of these other so-called first world nations, if you will, have fewer deaths to gun violence, and that is because the availability and prevalence of guns is not present in policy in those nations. And so while I don't know how old all of you are here with me, we're probably all old enough to have lived not only in a country where there was a Roe v. Wade, but we also lived where there was an assault ban, where these guns were not prevalent. But elections have consequences.
Absolutely.
Elections have consequences.
how did gun safety and gun violence become a partisan issue? Right. And so when someone says, I'm advocating for gun safety, I'm advocating for some realistic gun reform, that somehow has become an issue for the left.
But I think that it's not even an issue. I think it's fear, right?
Okay.
So earlier today in the roundtable, somebody brought up the fact that African Americans last year bought guns at a disproportionate rate, higher than we've ever bought, right? And the reason why African Americans brought guns is because we were looking at George Floyd, we were looking at Breonna Griner, we were looking at Breonna Greer, we were looking at the fact that we were no longer safe in our own homes, right? And the funny part about it is that we didn't see for years shootings were happening and there was no guns legislation passed. That stat got out there, and sooner or later there was gun legislation passed. Let's be honest. What moved gun legislation was not just Uvalde, it was not just Buffalo. It was the fact that when you put guns in the hands of too many African Americans, certain parts of the community are not comfortable with that. Let's be honest, right? Even when Georgia, the state of Georgia actually passed the open and carrying whatever law that they have, I remember walking into Publix and there was this black guy who was on the aisle, and everybody who was going down the aisle would back down the aisle and go to another corner, right? Because he had his gun openly out. There was 2 aisles over, there was a white guy who had his gun openly out. Everybody felt comfortable enough to walk down the aisle, right? And everybody stayed on the aisle. Not even understanding that the guy who was black 2 aisles over was a cop in Cobb County.
Get out of here.
And the other guy, I didn't know who he was. Mm-hmm. But again, like, somebody made a comment to me that really saddened me. They said that if enough African Americans bought guns, we'll see legislation moved at a disproportionate rate and move so quickly.
I've heard that too.
I've heard that.
Right? The whole fear dynamic. America's in a place right now where white people are afraid of black people are afraid of white people are afraid of, we're all afraid of each other. So the only solution that we've come to is that we have to protect our land. And don't forget, constitutionally, the reason why we have the Second Amendment, right? To be able to bear arms is for militia. Mm-hmm. It speaks to the real problem of our nation where everybody feels like they have to run to guns now. And what that tells us is that January 6th was not just the beginning of an opening of something. January 6th is going to be a long-term effect. When you look at stats right now, America's on the bridge of a civil war right now. Yes. And people feel like they have to get guns to stand up and protect themselves, protect their families, because they don't feel like their neighbor who doesn't look like them is doing it, right?
And can I also add that I understand all of that too, but even though the 2020 census, even though the global pandemic and COVID had this huge impact on it, to look at Georgia, the future is Georgia.
It is.
So when you look at the demographic shifts in this country, this blackening and browning of America, right? That also creates this fear of, well, if they get in the majority, are they going to do to us what we did to them, right? I mean, some of that, is very much, a part of this fear factor. But when he was talking about all these different places, I am sixth generation AME. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner actually founded my home church. But when we, call back to the ancestors, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner and Ida B. Wells both were huge Black folks have a gun in your house, advocates. So it's not even, this is a conversation that Black people don't have. Being a little girl raised in the middle of the Black Belt in the Deep South, every household, my granddaddy, my dad, everybody, had a gun. And I knew not to touch it. I may have known where it was, but I never touched it. I never went anywhere near it. I'm not a gun owner now. And so they're talking about a culture shift. When you ask the question about what has changed, it's a culture shift. We actually are living in the space of a gun culture, right? And it's not, and it's in the music, it's in the gaming industry, it's in the movies, and all this kind of thing. So it's a true culture. I mean, the first time I ever saw an AK-47 was Scarface. I ain't never did it, right? And possibly, I'd probably seen a couple of Vietnam movies and didn't pay attention, but the first time I really saw you know, or Glock, and you know, it was Scarface, right? And it was so interesting because at that time, you know, my dad owned a club, and the first time in his life, my dad had owned clubs like for years and years. In the past, and for the first time in all of his life, he had a shooting at his nightclub, you know, and it was just, you know, just felt very startling, and you know, to him. And I don't think that people understand it. As black folk, yeah, we've gone to play somebody, getting a fight, or you know, but this idea that someone comes to the club and intentionally is trying to mow people down, it's just not something. Yeah. And when you were talking about the fear, I thought about, you know, being AME, and after what happened at Mother Emanuel, how every AME church, you know, we are a connectional church, we're worldwide. Every AME church had to go into, you got to start locking your doors. Ushers need to be peeking out. You know, it's no more, you know, just come on. You know, ushers are, you know, looking at the doors, you know, very differently. And I mean, we were doing some Zooms back then, you know, because my pastor, we were doing Bible study on free conference call just for a little minute to cool it down, you know, because there were a lot of really ugly things coming in our mailboxes and emails after this Dylan Roof character. You know, really, I mean, there is a deifying of him and all of these, you know, mass murderers in a certain aspect of the community too. And so we have this misinformation and disinformation and all of these dark webs that are also feeding into this gun culture and feeding into the fear that people are experiencing every day.
How do we get to a place where with this culture of everyone having a gun and everybody's having fear, how do we get to a place where we can reduce that fear, change it to more love, shift that culture where we're not so much in getting guns and our young people hurting one another? What are you guys doing at Black Plush and with your organization as well? What are we doing to try to reduce that and change that?
So we're following Shaun. No, because honestly, when people ask me this question, the only way to shift culture is movement. Okay, so you don't shift culture without a movement. Correct. It is literally a lesson in physics. So we're following Shaun because force application, right? E equals MC squared is force. So it's the application of force through a movement that shifts culture. And I'm going to be quiet.
No, one of the things I would say too is that one of the things that we have a problem in the younger generation is about, and this is one thing I'm really trying to educate them on, is that we think that yelling on the bullhorn is enough. We think that's not moving. We think that getting people to sign on to something or making a TikTok video is enough. Reality is that one of the biggest ways we're going to combat gun violence is through policy. Let's not even.
It's got to be the worst.
I mean, but policy is going to be one of the biggest ways, right? We have to be out there. We have to be working. We have to make sure we're electing officials that actually stand up for guns. Because again, we're not advocating for guns to be taken off the streets. We're not advocating for people not to be able to have the right to carry guns. We don't. I mean, but I just believe personally. Well, I mean, I just personally believe that if you're going to have a gun, you should be permitted. You should be responsible. You should have to go through a background check. In the state of Georgia, most people did not even have a background check prior to purchasing a gun. The only time they actually had a background check ran on them was when they were actually applying to get their OE carry permit. Now that we've gotten rid of that process, we have eliminated background checks philosophically from the whole state of Georgia. From you're able to just openly purchase a gun.
And I don't understand, Shaun, if I got to take a test to drive, why don't I have to take a test
you have to
have a firearm?
So I
want people to pass a test on how to clean it, break it down.
Reverend Mack brought up something that was so impactful. He says, in order to even preach in somebody's pulpit, you have to have a license to preach.
That's right.
You have to study and show yourself.
That's right. Absolutely.
And for those of us who out there, whether you're right, like whatever, and you're Christian, how is that we argue back against things like having classes for people who purchase guns, having people lock them in safes when we are supposedly Christians? When the Bible itself says, show thyself approved, right? The study to show thyself approved. And when we talk about not only is it going to be a policy initiative, there are a part of it that we have to have programs. We have to have things for kids to do, right? We have to open up our churches. We have to open up our community centers. We have to give kids outlets. When you go to places like Uvalde, they don't have a huge population like Atlanta does. They don't have the resources that Atlanta does. They don't have the mental health resources that Atlanta may have, right? Even when it came down to Uvalde having that shooting, their mayor didn't even get the respect that Mayor Dickens would have got if that would happen in Atlanta. He was having to get information from me or other people about what the federal government was trying to do. Yeah, I mean, because again, it's a different city, it's a different town, right? We have to look at those different towns and those cities, because then too, we have to be realistic. A lot of our mass killings, they're coming from people who are coming into bigger towns, but they're coming from these little small towns, right? And we have to do more. We have to offer more resources to those towns. We have to offer more outlets to those towns. We have to offer more programs.
We do.
Churches have to be more on the front line. That's the one thing I love about First Iconium is like we're getting ready to make moves on this tremendously. We sit on the border. Right now we're sitting in Fulton County. If you go to the building on the east, we're sitting in DeKalb County, literally that building over there.
Okay.
So when we open up the whole community center that we plan on building here, it'll actually be able to serve both Fulton and DeKalb, right? The community center. So we're going to be dealing with things like mental health. We're going to be dealing with arts programs. We're going to be dealing with things like allowing kids to come in and get free tutoring. One of my board members actually runs his own nonprofit that does tutoring throughout the whole country virtually.
Yeah, I love that.
So we're going to bring all that stuff in.
And it's age group.
It's age group appropriate.
From pre-K on up.
We're going to be working with young women to get them motivated around running for office, because I believe that men have killed the political system. We need more women in the political system. We're going to be working with next week. We're working with a nonprofit organization called Boss Girls. We're taking them up to meet Zanona Clayton. We're going to be bringing back people from that past, because we also, one of the things I'm very instrumental about is that we have to figure out a way to bridge the past, the present, and the future, right? And for young people, we cannot be dismissive of our past. We cannot be dismissive when we have people like Ambassador Young who's still around us, and we can get wisdom from them. We can't be dismissive when we have people like Zanona Clayton who's still with us, and we can get wisdom from them. We had Reverend Durley walk up in this room today.
Oh, I hear that.
Folks who were allies, who were allies and been in the fights since the 60s and walked with King.
Got beat up on Selma Bridge. On Edmund Pettus Bridge. One of the things that I did this year, it was very impactful, was I took my whole team, anybody who wanted to go, and we went to Selma. And we actually marched on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Vice President Kamala Harris was there. But there was a great picture of us, like there's a video we have of us like coming down from the bridge, and there's a whole row of police officers there, and they were not there for anything negative. They was there because the Vice President was there. But that image of the police standing at the very end of the bridge and all of us coming down off the bridge reminded me of a photo I seen from John Lewis, where they were doing the same thing. And so bridging that past to the present, to the future, understanding that moment is important.
And last time I was in Selma was when Barack spoke, and I was actually on the buses that left here. So I was on the bus with Hosea Williams' children, James Orange's children, Joseph Lowry's children, and so I brought all these things. And it was just so amazing, going over with them to hear everything. And I had been to Selma, of course, before, because, of course, the AME Church there, Brown Memorial AME, is where all of the organizing, took place. But it was so incredible to have this intragenerational moment on this bus, to hear all these stories and, and to exchange and to hear all of the different ways that it was a community collective, that even though we saw, Ambassador Young and Reverend King and all these folks out in the front, but there was still, nobody was sitting there going, oh, well, they can't be out of, it was, we had decided who the spokespeople are, right? Everyone had a true responsibility, and everyone knew what they were doing.
Now is that Reverend Shaun and Kimberlyn Carter are carrying that torch forward. So you're now the new standard bearers. You're doing the work that has been passed down to you. And so with that, I would ask, what can our listeners do to plug into what you're doing? Because the framework is there. You're doing the work. You're out there in these streets, as we say. That's right. You're doing the work. That's right. How can our listeners get plugged into Black Push? How can they get plugged into changing the face of justice? Give us some action items.
Well, first, www.repgeorgia.org, and we have, and once they go to the Changing the Face of Justice link, it'll take them to all of our social media, all that. I love social media, of course.
Of course.
You know, I do.
The clicks.
Hello. We did a Telfar bag photo with her that I'm going to be posting on IG and tagging the designer, so that we can get a little attention there. But of course, what Shaun just said, I need people thinking about running for office. You need to run for something.
Yes.
Y'all see these folk on TV. Y'all know what Mrs. Obama said about her first time as First Lady, and she was going in this room in the White House with all these dignitaries and secretaries of this, that, and the other, and how she had this imposter syndrome in her head, and it was like, oh my God, I'm not as smart. And she said she gets in there and realizes what? These people aren't any better. These people aren't any smarter, right? Mm-hmm. And so we need bold, progressive, community-loving folks to think about running for office. Definitely.
Yeah, love it.
And for people who want to find out more information, like Kim said, Black Push, you can go to www.blackpush.org. We're on Facebook, we're on TikTok.
And TikTok. Oh, they have a great TikTok page. We have one too. Yeah.
We have Instagram, Twitter, I think almost every platform. But I would even caution too, like, one of the things that has been scary for me recently, and when people talk about people passing the torch to me, I don't see it that way, right?
We see it that way, you don't have to.
I know, but this is the thing about it is that last week I had the opportunity and I met with 3 people. I met with 3 of them back to back. I literally met with Zanona Clayton, I met with Reverend Durley, and then I met with Ambassador Young, like literally within a 2-day period, right? And she said to me, Zanona, Mrs. Clayton, we had met right after her birthday. So she had just turned 92. And she sat at the table with me and we were having lunch. And she said to me, Shaun, prior to me going to your gala, I was wondering, where are the youth and what are they doing? And she said, but I seen you and I heard you speak and you gave me encouragement for the youth. And I didn't know how to take that, right? I didn't know how to receive that. And it took me a while to process it when I got home. And my thing is that they not only passed it along to me, they passed it along to my generation, right? They passed along to my generation the fact that we have to stand up and protect the vote. Yes. They passed along to my generation that we have to stand up for climate change. They passed along to my generation that we have to stand up and make sure that our country doesn't go into bankruptcy. They passed along to my generation that we have to continue to fight for the rights of every person to be able to stand for the Constitution, where we ever say that every man is equal. Because right now we live in a country that has proven more than anything that every man is not equal. When officers are able to shoot a person on the side of the street and openly have video of it and go home free to their families at the end of the day, then we know that we're not equal. In the state of Georgia, for example, if you're an officer and you're involved in an officer-involved incident, you're able to speak at your grand jury hearing, right? They're the only person in the state that's allowed to speak in that grand jury hearing. As a regular person, you're not allowed any opportunity to have a voice in that grand jury hearing. But as a police officer, if you're involved in a police-involved incident, they allow you to come and speak at the grand jury hearing, dressed up in a uniform. And imagine if
it's very swaying.
It's very swaying, right?
Very swaying.
And again, I also think that as a nation, when I talk about that, they pass along to us too that we have to be realistic enough to say that even though law enforcement may not have always been on our side, we still need them, right? Let's be honest about that too. We need them. As African American, if somebody breaks into my house, I'm not calling Kim. I love Kim to death, but I'm not calling Kim. And I want to call Cobb County, and I want to make sure that person's prosecuted to the full extent of the law, right? But there's still this grace factor of it, right? And we talk about that when you mention the fact that we're carrying the torch. The torch is too big for us to carry by ourselves. Correct. The torch was too big for Martin Luther King to carry by himself. The torch was too big for Ambassador Young to carry by himself. What they've done is they've carried the torch together jointly, because when we talk about that civil rights movement, there's a lot of names in there we don't mention, right? And it was them. And even from a Christian standpoint, the Bible says that even as Jesus was on his way to the cross and when he was nailed to the cross, the Bible says at one point he got so tired of carrying the cross that there was a man who was walking on the side of the street who helped him carry the cross, right? And he was not being penalized. He had nothing to do with what Jesus had been sentenced with. But the fact of the matter is that he looked at this person and he said that, the mission that he has is bigger than just him. Let me play a part in that mission. So I would challenge for everybody, we love money. We don't mind you donating, right? But it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that.
Can I just submit?
We don't mind you donating.
Can I just submit that when I say that you're carrying the torch, that doesn't mean that you're carrying the torch alone. Right. Everyone that was here on this panel, everyone that spoke about the gun violence that they experienced and they decided to do something, they turned their pain into action, they're all carrying that torch.
That is so beautiful.
Spoke about the fact that 5 of her children are in jail and she lost 6 family members. And so now she has become an activist. She's carrying that torch.
And a mentor.
And a mentor.
And a mentor to other parents.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point.
All shoulder responsibility to heal our community.
Right, absolutely.
No one greater than the next. It's just that you guys are in a more fluid position that now we can connect you to viewers so people can plug in. And all of us do the work. Get in the lane that you do well in. You may be attorney, I just may be an organizer, you may be this and that and so forth. Find your spot and run it as long as the movement is going.
Right.
And I would even say
it is about movement, but now he and I are not on the same page about law enforcement because this current law enforcement, this current law enforcement was built on the foundation of slave patrols, and so it is built on the foundation of oppression, white supremacy, racism, and the erasure of the black body. So there is no way that we can continue with what we have as contemporary law enforcement because of what it is founded on. It has to be disrupted. It has to be changed. It has to be disarmed.
And replaced with what? What would that look like?
Well, we have several replacements. I mean, because I'm not even really big into community policing because who am I sending into the community, right? But we have to remove this idea of law enforcement and replace it with the idea of community safety. And so when you use community safety as how we define it, then that completely changes how we enforce our laws. So we do warrant clinics, which are like community courts, where the judges come to us. We don't take nobody to the courtroom, The judges come into our community, the district attorneys come into our communities, the solicitor generals come into our communities, right? We have neighborhood associations that when there are issues and problems in the community, we don't call the police, we do call parents. We do have communications with young people about, so what's really going on in the community? So I'm saying there are several different ways. Even when he talked about Uvalde, I got calls because in Uvalde, they were having a problem finding Spanish-speaking therapists for the children. So when we talk about can there be something different, we have to reimagine something different because it is a matter of life and it's a matter of death. So we need to do brake light clinics in our communities. Because why? Because of Sandra Bland. Because of all these people who have been pulled over for a brake light or some kind of minor thing that end up losing their lives at the hand of this current structure that we have called law enforcement. It has to be disrupted, it has to be disarmed, and we have to reimagine something better called community safety.
And that sounds like a conversation that we have to build upon that one. We have to build upon that.
And I'll end by saying this too, though. Even what you guys are doing by just having a conversation with us is passing the torch.
It is.
It's definitely passing the torch because not a lot of people are willing to even host and have this conversation.
No.
And I will say I agree with Kim that we have to disrupt law enforcement because, again, at the end of the day, we have seen too many cases where African Americans have gone in unarmed and walked away without their life. But people like Dylan Roof have walked away and they got treated to Burger King on their way to jail. So we have to hold them accountable. And I think that part of how we reform law enforcement or community safety is it has to look like the community in which they serve.
I agree with that. That I agree with.
It has to look like the community in which they serve. And again, when you ask the question, what can some of our listeners do? We need more of them in the police. Because the reality is that we're not going to get rid of police overnight. But we need more of them in the police chief's office. We need more of them wearing badges and actually out there representing their community and being a part of their community. We need them to understand that law enforcement, to a certain aspect, is not the place. I mean, it's great to hold them accountable, but at the same time, the way we hold them accountable is we actually play a part and what goes on and the policies that are being put in there. We've gone to different jails from rural counties to metro counties, but we've actually helped them rebuild how they train their officers, right? In Paulding County, we toured the jail. We talked to them about how they train the officers. We can do it.
Right.
We just have to have an appetite to do it.
Absolutely. So I think that you guys have given us so much great information.
Yes.
And we definitely are going to have part two and 3 and 4 and bring y'all back.
This is an ongoing conversation because I'm interested in wanting to learn more about what does it look like when we police our own communities. Like they come like and what does that look like?
And used to. I mean, Black Panthers. I mean, everybody created gangs. Like,
but that's one way. Are there other ways?
Correct.
But these are conversations to have.
That's right.
And this is why we have conversations with Karen and Kat.
Yes. So with that,
thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Shaun. I love you. I love you, Shaun.
Thank you for joining us for Conversations with Karen and Kat.
Well, we are impacting the world one conversation at a time.